All right, so while that's what we got from the CEO of Go First Airline, even as they file for bankruptcy, we're looking at the Indian aviation market. On your screen, you're seeing the market share that these airlines, the existing ones, enjoy at this point in time. Obviously, there is going to be a tectonic shift now that you're going to pull out one airline from that entire mix. And there are certain sectors that are going to lend themselves that much more fruitfully for certain airlines compared to others. So there is a shift that's happening in the Indian aviation space, but it isn't like we haven't seen airlines face financial turbulence in the past. To decode what's happening there and what could likely happen in the future, let's connect with Captain Sanjay Karve. He's joining us as Chief Pilot of Government of Maharashtra, along with Jitendra Bhargava, former Executive Director at Air India, is with us. And for a market perspective, independent market expert Mahantesh Sabarad is here with us as well. Mr. Bhargava, to you first, and good evening to all of you gentlemen. But Mr. Bhargava, why do airlines really fail in India? Is this peculiar to Indian skies? What's happening over here that we don't see elsewhere? Because Jet, Kingfisher in the recent past, there are other airlines in a little bit more in our history like Air Costa and Modi Luft. But that list actually includes the likes of Sahara and Damania as well. So what do you make of this kind of financial turbulence that seems to consume our airlines even as the market seems to grow multifold?
You know, it's about 3 decades ago that the government of India, in change of policy, allowed private airlines to set up airlines in India. There was a mad rush initially. Several airlines came up by industrialists who had no experience of the airline industry and no knowledge of the industry. So they did not last very long, and that was the trend started of airlines coming up and folding within a matter of months. But 3 airlines, primarily Kingfisher, Jet Airways, both good products, exceedingly good products, and now Go First, is a different story. And the reasons are very clear. One, we are a very price-sensitive market. Our operating costs in India are much higher than most other places. Compounding the problem is the sale tax on the ATF is also very high in most states of India. So once you make the operational costs high, price-sensitive market, airlines growing, airlines sacrificing profitability in trying to garner market share was the trend till the COVID period came. So with the result, legacy carriers, Kingfisher, Jet Airways, Air India, Vistara, have never made profit because they just couldn't sustain, because the benchmarking of the fares was done by the low-cost airlines. And in our case, Indigo had a dominant player so they could fix. Now, if you go to any travel portal, you will be surprised to see that Air India, Vistara, though they serve food, their seat pitch is much better, etc., but they are pricing their fares just 100, 200, 300 rupees more than it. So you really can't be profitable. And this is what happened to Kingfisher and Jet Airways as well. So as long as the market is dominated by low-cost airlines, which accounts for virtually 84, 83% now, so they are setting the benchmark. Now, taxes being high, government, there is very little that the airlines can do in these circumstances. Passengers being price sensitive, go for an airline which offers the cheapest fare, not bothered about anything, so you can't sustain it. There are only 2 ways to go about it. Government reducing taxation so that the operating costs go down. Airlines, particularly the full service carrier, adopting a business model that can help make them profitable. In the case of Go Air, of course, Go First is a totally different ballgame.
Yes.
Their CEO made it very clear here that their fundamental, their cost metrics, etc., are all in line with the industry practices.
Exactly.
So where have they gone wrong? So basically, one must buy their claim that it's entirely due to non-delivery of engine, non-servicing.
Yes, those are the reasons that they are citing. But they are also talking about a possible revival, that they are going to make the effort and they remain optimistic about it. Is this just wordplay? Captain Karve, how do you think if we are going to see the Indian aviation sector lose a player, and this is likely to happen in the future as well because it's not unknown to Indian skies, are we headed towards a duopoly like some experts are suggesting with just an Air India and an Indigo in fray?
Good evening, Vikram. In fact, this is a very scary situation. You just showed on the screen that Indigo has got 300 aircraft. We really don't know what is the exposure of Indigo to Pratt Whitney. and similarly Air India. Today, Pratt Whitney has defaulted in its commitment towards go first. Tomorrow it could be Indigo. Just imagine what happens if Indigo decides to ground even 20% of its aircraft. Your entire schedule is going to go haywire. Your pricing is going to go haywire. And a new player is obviously going to be very skeptical in entering the field, especially depending on the foreign engines. We know that the supply chain has got disrupted because of COVID, but it has been a year plus, and I'm sure Pratt and Whitney and Rolls-Royce and all these big engine companies need to have some system in place to ensure that there is continuity of supplies. Otherwise, they are going to lose trust.
Yes, but Captain, are you saying that the intrinsic problem, because this is about an arbitration as far as the delivery of Pratt and Whitney engines are concerned, you are pointing towards this one element. Is there a bigger systemic problem that we have, like Mr. Bhargava was pointing out? And if you think that this is only a, an issue that Go First is facing, do you even think that they could come out of this in a way that is going to keep the airline alive?
No, I'm not saying that this is the main problem. What I'm saying is there is a cause for concern for other airlines too. The dependence on Pratt and Whitney and Rolls-Royce. Imagine what happens tomorrow if Indigo decides to ground its aircraft. Fortunately, they have 300 aircraft, so they can use a couple of aircraft as Christmas tree and have aircraft flying. But just give it a thought. A big company like Pratt and Whitney refuses international arbitration, and we really have no control over it. What happens to your skies?
It's an important question to ask, but also I'm looking at how these stocks, these aviation stocks have fared, because therein lies a story as to how investors have approached aviation in India as well, and that's an important element. Mahantesh, how have they done? How do investors approach airlines, stocks like SpiceJet and Interglobe and Jet? Are they likely now to get more of a leg up from the Go First bankruptcy?
So firstly, the history of market investments in the airline has not been very positive. People have lost money in Kingfisher. Mind you, it was a publicly listed company. Investors had to let go of Jet Airways as well in terms of their investments. They've also lost money when Jet Airways went through bankruptcy. Now we are fortunately facing with a company like Go Air, which is unlisted. So that's why I said fortunately they don't have to worry about it much. But even Indigo has gone through its ups and downs in terms of delivering profits, delivering returns to shareholders. Currently, the stock is doing relatively better. With consolidation happening, probably Indigo, the listed player right now with a larger reach and a fleet which is running on Airbuses, will tend to gain when Go quits the market. More than, let's say, SpiceJet. SpiceJet has also had a patchy history in terms of delivering returns to shareholders. So from a market investment perspective, none of the airlines have really given sustained and great earnings for investors over the long run.
An important question to ask is, because there have been safety concerns in the past. SpiceJet was caught in the middle of all the news flow on security concerns. Is this a matter of safety as well, that we are relying so much on the delivery of Pratt & Whitney engines at a time that, we are looking to really upgrade? We are looking at growing the entire sector. We are held ransom in a way to the delivery of certain engines, and that seems unbecoming for a sector that is really at the nascent stage of huge growth. Mr. Bhargava, for you.
I don't think safety is a factor, because no airline would like to play risk. There have been issues kind of a thing, but DGCA has of late been more attentive. Their inspectors have been visiting airlines, taking care that the safety regulations are not flouted. That's, I would broadly rule out or not allow any kind of fear being spread that, look, Indian aviation, risk safety, etc. It does not happen that way. But question comes in is the training to the pilots, the aircraft maintenance engineers, regulatory body. Don't forget that FAA and the European Aviation Agency regularly monitor India's regulatory agency. They don't find anything wrong. They finish things. A time was 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago when they cited shortage of manpower with them, but that has been more or less overcome. That's one part of it. The second part is the CEO, and I would like to quote him here. You see why we are talking of revival, or he's talking. He's not being any different from what Vijay Mallya was or what Naresh Goyal did after the airline ceased operation. They just let the optimism spread that we'll be back soon. We heard Mr. Khona here talking about the entire cause of grounding or shutting down of operations has been put on Pratt Whitney. They have not looked at the operational costs.
Yes.
Now, if they have to do it, there has to be a simple comparison between Indigo cost parameters and the parameters for Go Air. Why is it that Go Air makes huge profit? It's also a low-cost airline. Number one, of course, is the scale of operations is far more than either SpiceJet or for Go Air. But the reality is, Indigo is far more efficiently run than other carriers. So there has to be a full study undertaken by Go First. Be very realistic and objective. Are they really speaking the truth? I would like to hear that thing. One, of course, the Pratt Whitney has come out belatedly with a statement that everything that Go First has said is not necessarily true. There are other issues as well.
Yes, indeed.
Now, it's for the media now to get on in greater detail and say,
yes,
because you can't allow an international company, okay, arbitration award has been given, not honored. There are systems in place. How do you take them legally?
Right.
The case has been filed in Delaware. Well, it's gone ahead. But question to be asked is, December 2019,
yes,
7% of the fleet was down. December 22, 50% of the fleet is down. We are talking of a 3-year period. Can you allow a problem to simmer for so long?
Yes. You are pointing towards the management of an airline or the lack of it. But Mr. Bhargav, I'm also looking at the demand-supply situation.
One point here.
Yes.
You see, we got to understand
yes,
whether it was Jet Airways, whether it was Kingfisher, whether it is Go First.
Yes.
All have been promoter-centric.
And you see an intrinsic problem with that. Do you see an intrinsic problem with that?
Yes, because they cannot see, or there are not many people, senior management people, who can walk up to a promoter and say, sir, there is something fundamentally wrong. We need to take corrective action.
Captain, do you agree? Captain Karve, do weigh in on this. As far as Mr. Bhargav is pointing out, he says that, it's the management and our focus on promoters being at the center of an airline that is problematic. Would you say that this is true?
I would agree with him, because what is brought out is from 2019 to 2022, if you have a problem and it's not being solved, someone should have seriously looked at it or at least briefed the management. What it appears is none of these things have been done. It is only when we have reached a stage where you don't have engines to fly, where you don't have an aircraft to fly, then things are coming up. And operational cost, yes. Like he said, one would really like to look at what were the operational costs in 2018, 19 and 22 vis-a-vis Indigo or SpiceJet.
So in terms of operational costs, now how do you even compare that with what happens in the rest of the world? Mr. Bhargav, as far as the pressures on an airline today, when you consider the demand and supply situation in Indian skies, at this point in time, what do you think are the biggest factors at play that determines profitability or the lack thereof?
This airlines have been going through a purple patch. If you really look at it, the load factors have been very high. Airlines are operating with 90% plus seat occupancy, which is basically you really can't have a phase of this kind, a prolonged phase. The fares are much higher. We have been talking about price sensitivity of the Indian market, notwithstanding the fact that the fares are relatively higher, significantly higher, I would say. And yet the market has been growing. Let's take this comparative figure. January 2020, number of passengers on domestic sector flying, 410,000 passengers a day. Today, 430,000 plus passengers flying. Number of flights being operated are today less than 3,000 as against 3,100 flights that were being operated prior to COVID, which clearly indicates that the deployment of capacity is lower today, but the carriage of passengers is much higher, resulting in higher load factors for the airlines, higher fares for being paid by the passengers, and higher profitability. Please don't be surprised when Indigo, as a listed company, announces its quarterly results from January to March 23 period, it could be something like 20 crore profit a day, as against 15 crore profit a day registered by them in the quarter October-December 22.
Mahantesh, as far as profitability is concerned for the airlines and the kind of earnings that they've reported in the past, do you see a kind of trend? Because there is a marked difference, like Mr. Bhargava is pointing out, in the way that Indigo has done for itself as opposed to many other airlines. Do you see that distinctly in the kind of earnings reports that airlines have come up with? Mahantesh, for you.
So is that for me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Mr. Bhargava just pointed out two important points as far as profitability is concerned. One is the fares, and the other is the load factor. There are two other factors that we should be considering which contribute to the profitability of an airlines. Actually, that's why I say there are four. One is the price, which is RASK, revenue per ASKM, that they get. The second, which Mr. Bhargava himself pointed out, which was load factors, which is occupancy. The third factor is actually dollar exchange rate. Higher the exchange rate, greater is the pressure on the profitability because most of their costs are dollarized. And the fourth point is got to do with actually fuel costs. Now, what you will surprisingly see in all these four factors, there is some degree of taxation which hounds the airlines' balance sheets and profitability. There is taxation issue actually hitting the RASK numbers in an indirect fashion, because now you have what is called as a user development fee, which are growing in quantum, and the availability in terms of available pool of revenue for an airline is actually shrinking. That's number one. Number two, on the occupancy factors side, you will notice that a lot of it is dependent on the block hour usage of the aircrafts, which is getting subdued simply because you have a poor airport capacity right now. The third is the aspect of dollar, which is now something which is Indian rupee is linked to the dollar globally, and we have seen significant depreciation of the rupee over the past 3-4 years. And the final factor is fuel. Some portion of the fuel cost is actually driven by the taxes that the government imposes both at the center as well as by the states. So somewhere, what I reckon is that profitability for the airlines, if we consider these four factors, most of them are beyond the control, operational control of managements of airlines, and therefore, as a sector, this sector faces challenges in terms of driving profitably. The only way you can drive profits is through scale, which is what Indigo is achieving. That scale allows them to have very low maintenance costs. Mr. Bhargava talked about a study to be conducted. You simply look at the maintenance cost of an Indigo and compare it with somebody else in the Indian aviation industry. You will find a huge difference.
No, absolutely.
Almost
so
a
with
rupee
all
per
these
ASKM.
factors, yes, certainly. So with all these factors at play, Captain Karve, what do you see as the future of the airline business? Because it's not like we have one airline going bust and others aren't coming in. You have an Akasa Air that has made an entry. You're seeing a Fly 91 come into the fray as well. What is the future looking like? Are we going to have more and more of these aviation companies still trying to take a bigger pie of the aviation industry in the country? Because potential is huge, but all these factors on profitability stand. How are they going to survive in the long run? Do you see that happening?
Most certainly. The future is definitely bright, with more tier 2 and tier 3 cities having airports. And the basic fact that Indians have got used to flying, which was not so 10 or 15 years ago. 10 to 15 years ago, if you recollect, flying was considered to be a luxury and a rich man's prerogative, which is not so today. And we have to credit Air Deccan, Mr. Gopinath, for changing the perception. And now that we have got used to it, or tasted blood, as someone would like to call it, aviation sector is something which is going to move forward. And with the government's initiative of having airports at smaller cities, you have a lot of people flying between the smaller cities and from smaller cities to the major metros. People are coming in, people are realizing that you require experts to run companies, and which is what people are doing. Now, Air India, despite its vast pool of experts within Air India and within the Tata Group, they have decided to take people from outside. This just shows that the management is well aware of the pitfalls and what they need to do. So as I personally feel, the aviation sector in India has a bright future if it gets the adequate support from the government of India. Like Mr. Bhargava pointed out, we are required to have a relook at the taxation systems.
Things will need to happen from the government side as well to make it more conducive, more inducive for more players within the aviation sector so that we're not reduced to a duopoly over there, as some experts have even suggested. But that is for the future. Right now, Captain Karve is striking a very positive note as we wrap up this discussion. But those problems that ail the Indian aviation sector stand, and we'll continue to track them. Jitendra Bhargava, Captain Sanjay Karve, and Mahantesh, Sabarad, many thanks for joining us with your perspective on this edition of India Tonight. Pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.